I'm Timothy Gassen. They call me the AZ Puckman. I've covered hockey in Arizona for more than 3 decades, and this is my Roadrunners Hockey Report. Welcome to the season-ending edition of the Roadrunner Hockey Report. I have a special guest. This is the broadcast voice of the Tucson Roadrunners. This is Tom Callahan. Now, Tom, we usually get to talk a lot about the development of the Roadrunners. For the last 2 years, I've been the color commentator for the home broadcasts for the Roadrunners, but this season ended on the road, so we haven't had a chance to talk about the playoffs. So could you just give me your characterization? How did the Roadrunners do in their playoff run in 2018, their very first playoff in just their second year of operation?
Which, first of all, is very exciting, Tim. That was a great time for the organization to be able to make the playoffs, and I think the fan support was great, so I want to say thanks to the fans, and they were fantastic. But you know what? To not only get into the playoffs, but to finish out the regular season as not only division but conference champions, there were a lot of things the team had going for it. They win that first playoff round over San Jose. Those are all things you can build off of. And then you go in against Texas, and the Texas Stars got hot at the right time. They were able to knock the Roadrunners out. Then they went right through the Rockford IceHogs, who were one of the hottest teams in the playoffs at that point, and then they lost in 7 to Toronto in the Calder Cup final. So, it's tough when you lose. It's tough when you get knocked out. But I think there's a lot to build off of for this team, and that playoff run is experience that you just can't put a price on.
Well, let's talk about that experience. We had a young goaltender, Aiden Hill, in goal, played very well down the stretch in the regular season, was the go-to guy in the playoffs, played well in the playoffs, but it was his very first professional playoff season. Did it kind of show that talented players like that have more room for development? They have a higher ceiling. They need to be in Tucson just a little bit longer.
Sure they do. Absolutely. I think, Hill is one example of that. And I think towards the end of the series, maybe it got to him a little bit versus a guy like Mike McKenna, who's a 12-year pro, and the goalie for Texas was able to handle that a little better. Dylan Strome's another example. 8 points in the first round, didn't have anything in the second round. Maybe the excitement, the adrenaline is there for that first round against San Jose, and then you don't pace yourself. You don't know. It's like if you're going to go 4 rounds, it's going to take a lot more energy, especially after you've played the regular season. And I think that, for young guys like that, those are all little things I think no one thinks about. They think, oh, you just go out and play the game and you play at the same intensity every night, every shift. You can't. Those are things you have to learn to do. And I think some of the younger guys getting that experience under their belt, it'll help them out a lot.
Well, let's talk about the difference between regular season play and the playoffs. The Toronto Marlies, the eventual AHL champions, were arguably the best team in the regular season. Tucson was arguably the second best team in the regular season in the AHL, as you said, winning not only their division and the conference, but it was the Texas Stars that caught fire in the playoffs in the conference. What's the difference, especially for young players, from regular season play to playoff play? Why does one team catch fire and another that's been great all year kind of run out of steam?
I think actually the actual question of age is part of it. I think that when you have a younger team, you are more susceptible to highs and lows and not knowing how to pace yourself and get through things. I think Texas is a little more of a veteran team. Toronto certainly is. And their young guns are still their young guns, but there's not as many of them on those teams. Now, a franchise like the Coyotes that is building for the future through Tucson, a lot of those guys are going to have some inexperience. That's why you always try to get a good core of veterans. But for a young guy going in, we talked about energy level, trying to pace yourself. Now you've just played a regular season, and now it's the old Spinal Tap. It goes to 11, and it's, some people say, people turn it up in the playoffs. I say it's a whole nother set of dials that you have to find. And maybe you haven't had that pressure before in your career, or maybe it was different, if you were in junior or college. So it's all learning experience for these guys, and the veterans have to help them learn how to handle it. For a young guy like Hill, I think playing 2 series is invaluable. That's going to be big for his resume down the road too, but it's just a matter of getting there. And that's why you talk about building a winner at this level. You need to win and excel at the AHL level, I believe, to accelerate the development.
Well, now I've written about in my column for the Arizona Daily Star about one of the challenges in the AHL and following an AHL team is that if you're successful,
you lose your guys.
Right.
Because that's the job of an AHL team, to develop that young talent and get it up to the Arizona Coyotes. So I'm not surprised that head coach Mike Van Ryn has had an opportunity to go and be an assistant in the National Hockey League. His team really seemed to respond to him this year. They really performed well for him. So Coach Van Ryn is now with the St. Louis Blues organization. How does the departure of a head coach like Coach Van Ryn affect the Roadrunners organization?
Well, considering that Van Ryn was in the organization prior to his hiring as head coach, I think was important because it allowed him to jump in and seamlessly become a part of things. And so the organizational message was consistent from day one. And they'd seen all three of these guys before the coaching staff for the Roadrunners, the players had, because they'd been there, they'd been around them. And I think that, you know, when you have that development model, and it makes me wonder, will there be another internal candidate to take over again, which I don't know at this point. But that's what the Coyotes want to do. I think they were pretty firm in establishing that this past year. So when you lose a guy like Van Ryn, yes, it hurts. But I think that if you're going to continue to work the system and implement it the way you did last year, next man up, as long as they are in that same mold, should make it a little easier and a little more fluid for the players to still be on that same path.
Now, hockey teams are always in a state of change, but especially in the off season. Of course, the Roadrunners will make changes, and they've already made some changes. Mike Sislo and Kyle Wood are no longer with the organization. Mike Sislo was one of my favorite Roadrunners this year, has a great offensive touch. Kyle Wood, of course, was an AHL All-Star last season, but he didn't get nearly as much ice time this year. Sometimes changing an organization can help a player. Kyle Wood didn't develop as quickly as I think everybody wanted in the second year, but will it help him going to another organization to have other people evaluate him, to have other opportunities?
Well, and San Jose is a good spot for Wood because they've just, the Barracuda have just graduated defensemen to the Sharks over the last year and a half, 2 years. So I think it's going to be better for him to see ice time and develop in San Jose with the Barracuda, if that's where he is, or if he's got a shot out of camp, I don't know. But I think that that's a better spot for him than here, where, quite frankly, the Roadrunners / Coyotes have an embarrassment of riches on defense, especially younger guys. It's not a slight for him to not crack the top six for part of the playoffs. We had an excellent top six this year heading into the postseason. It's hard to argue with those players, especially some of the guys they brought in at the deadline. So, Tim, honestly, I think he's going to have a nice chance to do a little better, and in bringing Haluka back this way gives the Roadrunners a little extra scoring up front. Not quite 40 points out of Haluka this year, but I like his game, and I think he'll fit in. He's a guy I think can drop in with the Roadrunners. And Sislo, veteran scorer. You need one or two of those guys. Last year it was a Chris Mueller.
Yeah.
This past season it was Mike Sislo, and they can be hired guns, if you will, at this level in the American Hockey League. A couple of games in the National Hockey League, usually under 100, but boy, can they produce points here, and that's what Sislo was this year. And I think that the Roadrunners will look for that guy to fill that role this next year, but in exchange, they get a big kid back from Rochester, and I think one of the things that, quite frankly, the Roadrunners didn't have, and maybe the Coyotes are looking for too, is a little bit more size.
Well, let's talk about those parent Arizona Coyotes. Oliver Ekman-Larsson signing a big contract should keep him a Coyote for the rest of his career. That was an important signing for the Coyotes. But the Coyotes need to win now, and they have a lot of young talent in their system. Well, a guy like Tucson Roadrunner Dylan Strome, does he have a chance to crack that opening day roster, kind of like Brendan Perlini was with the big club this year and did very well, former Tucson Roadrunner? Does Dylan Strome, or are there other Roadrunners that have that chance to crack that opening day roster for the parent NHL Arizona Coyotes?
Strome is a guy I think has a strong chance based on his second half and his last showing in his last call-up. He got better from the first to the second. I think he has a shot now. He showed that he could compete at that level towards the end of the season. So yes, and my opinion has changed if you would ask me this around Christmas.
Yes.
So I think that that's a nice case of development there. Lawson Krause is another guy, I think, who really refined his game a lot this year and kind of figured out who he was and developed a lot over the course of the season. So he's one. Trevor Murphy is a guy who I think the Coyotes liked a lot in his recall, could have a good shot at cracking that top six. And another guy who really it's going to depend on his health, is Nick Merkley. Merkley, lower body injury, missed the rest of the season there. And if he can recover and come back, he can have a legit shot to compete in their training camp, I think. But again, this is a case where it's the player's body who's going to determine whether or not he makes it, not his talent.
Well, that'll wrap things up for this season's Roadrunner Hockey Report. I want to thank my special guest. This is Tom Callahan, the broadcast voice of the Tucson Roadrunners. I'm Timothy Gassen reporting, and we look forward to seeing you at the Tucson Arena this next season for more Tucson Roadrunners hockey.